everybody. Welcome to Justice Served Daily. Appreciate you being here today. Today we are covering a very long ago cold case here for Tabitha Raines in Tipton, Indiana. And this young girl was murdered back on October 2nd of 2002. And we're going to go over her case and some information and stuff that we have gathered. But we do have a special guest with us today, and it is Mr. Josh Sigler. Welcome.
Thank you, Justice. It's an honor to be on the show today.
Well, we appreciate you being here. Now, Josh is a Tipton, Indiana native, and he is also a former reporter with the Tribune, and now also an author because he has written a book about Tabitha Raines' case and and what happened to TABI. And so we thought we would invite him here to share some information and stuff with us about it. And we'll kind of talk and go over the case and make sure we know all the players and everything. I would like to thank our group who's already joining in with us: Jinx, Mama Bear, Lance, Kelt. I see you guys. Thank you all for being here. Let me go into sharing my screen here really quickly and make sure that I can bring this up for you guys can see all the images and everything that are going to be showing. So make sure can you guys see that all okay out there? Let me know if you can see everything, and we will get started. So this is, I captured the book that Josh has just written, as you guys can see up there on the screen. And I am going to go ahead and make it a slideshow here for we can see everything. And obviously one of the big things, Josh, that also just intrigues me, and I know is going to intrigue everybody, is also about, the information that you were able to obtain as a journalist, even from an informant who basically shared some details with you. But why don't we go ahead and get started and just kind of talk a little bit about the case itself here, and let everybody know about it. Obviously, if you guys are not aware of where Tipton, Indiana is located, it is north of Indianapolis, and thought we would kind of just show you a little bit of some map area. You guys know how I'm a visual person, so that always helps me out quite a bit for the area. And Josh, is this an accurate photo here of Tipton Park?
It sure is. Yeah, that's actually, I don't know where you got that map from, but that's actually a pretty up-to-date one in terms of, because in the last 20 years, there's been quite a bit of changes in the park, and this captures the way it looks today. Yeah, so that is, the park hasn't changed much in 20 years. What you're looking at, so as you'll find out as we talk about the case, that little, it looks like a parking lot there next to the creek. Yeah, right where your mouse is.
Okay.
But back in 20 years ago, that wasn't there.
Okay.
And there was kind of a depression down near the creek after the pathway there. And then there was a restroom that sat there and some shuffleboard courts. And that's all been moved since then. And as you'll find out, as the story goes, everything that happened that night happened in the park.
Right.
But as you learn about the case, you'll understand why that could be problematic on many fronts. But 20 years ago, that parking lot wasn't there. And basically where the footbridge is, if you go up to where the pool is,
yeah,
go up to where the pool is, and then that footbridge to the right. If you follow your mouse to the right, there's a footbridge right there.
Okay.
So essentially, when this 16-year-old girl was killed, the story goes that they drug her body from that footbridge around to where this baseball diamond would be down the bottom, where it says
Okay.
baseball field.
Yeah.
And they used the cover of the creek. And 20 years ago, you see how all that looks brown around the edges of the creek banks?
Yes.
That was all covered in mature trees. And at night, it was a really good place to take cover and stay out of the view of people. And what they did was they carried the body from that footbridge around to the baseball field in the back. And the one thing that is important to note about this map, and the point I'm trying to make, is that 20 years ago, there was a very thick cover of mature trees around the creek bed right there.
Okay.
And then there's been some amenity upgrades along the backside. So it may seem like, looking at the map today, that the way that they purportedly drug the body doesn't seem plausible.
Right.
But it's because the geography of the park has changed quite a bit.
Sure.
So
let's go ahead and get started to talk about Tabitha herself, and she goes by Tabi, correct?
Correct.
And so she was reported missing on October 2nd of 2002.
Yep.
Because she was last seen at 6:30 p.m. because she was leaving with a girlfriend to go to a hospital to see that girlfriend's grandmother. Correct? That was the report.
Correct. So the story that was
and that's Amanda Pratt, correct?
So the story that was told to investigators initially was that Tabi had a friend, Amanda, whose grandmother was gravely sick in the hospital, and that Amanda Pratt's boyfriend, Kyle Neff, was waiting outside for her in a car to pick her up and take her to the hospital. And so she left her son, Drake, with her stepmother, Roberta, and they kind of lived in a triplex where Tabi and her husband, Michael, and then Michael's mother, Roberta, and their family lived in a different part of the structure. And so she left the son there, and that was the last time anybody saw her.
And so, and Tabi herself was very young.
Correct.
Yeah. And she was married to Michael Raines. Yeah. And she had an 8-month-old baby.
Correct. So I graduated from Tipton High School in 2002, and Tabitha would have just finished her sophomore year. And then she got pregnant, and the father, Michael Raines, who would have been a year ahead of me in school, they got married, I think in April of that year. Of 2002. Yeah, would have been April.
Okay. And so when she left that night, which was about 6:30 p.m., she dropped Drake, who is her little boy, off at her mother-in-law's house.
Correct.
For her to watch the baby when she took off to leave.
Yes.
So
and so I guess the story went initially that it wasn't out of the ordinary for Tabi to ask the mother-in-law to watch her while she went and did something. So it didn't seem anything out of the ordinary to the stepmother to the mother-in-law at the time.
And then but her husband was the one who reported her missing, correct?
Correct. So Michael, her husband, he worked in Kokomo at a mechanic shop, and then also after he worked during the day, would drive down to Indianapolis to go to school at a place called Lincoln Technical Institute, where he was working on a degree in mechanics. And he got home. He would get home of the night at about 11 o'clock at night, and he got home and no one was there at his place. So he walked around to the mother-in-law's part of the triplex there, and the mother explained to him that what had happened and that she had Drake. And so he went on back to his apartment and went to sleep, but he did notice that there was a pack of menthol cigarettes sitting on the coffee table that he didn't recognize as anyone that he would see normally. And then the TV was on a baseball game, and he thought that was also really out of the ordinary too when he got home. So, but he went to sleep, and Roberta waited up for Tabby till like 3 in the morning, and she went to sleep. And then Michael, the husband, woke up at like 5:45 in the morning the next morning, and she still wasn't there. He went to work, and then he left work to go down to Indianapolis to go to school because he had to take a test. But I guess at some point during that ride, he changed his mind after the urging of his mom, I guess, to turn around and come back to Tipton. And so I think it was 24 hours after she had last been seen that they finally went to the police station and filed the missing persons report.
Yeah, so on that Thursday, so it appeared to be that her mother-in-law, which would have been Michael's mother, then called Tabby's mom and was talking, saying about finding her and stuff like that. And so they end up reporting her missing and stuff on Thursday, which they seem to appear to, find that odd that, she would just not come home, not be back, anything like that. So then we get into, them looking for her. And then they end up finding her, a young group of boys, I believe, kids fishing, were the ones who found her at the Cicero Creek in the Tipton City Park.
Yeah, so that tree cover that I was talking about 20 years ago made a great place for kids to go down to the bank and fish and stuff. And those two boys, and I actually played youth baseball with the boy's brother. And he was, anybody that was a minor during the time of the murder and investigation, I left their names out or didn't interview them and stuff. But this same boy the day before was fishing that same spot and saw what he thought was a body floating in the water. So this would have been the 4th of October. He went and found an adult and showed him. And this was the day before the police actually acknowledged the body. Like the adult that he told assured him that it was a mannequin, and they left. The next day, the same boy and his friend were fishing the same spot, saw what they saw again, and this would have been around 2:00 on October 5th. They went and told a different adult this time who came and looked and was like, yeah, that's a body. So that's when the cops got called. So, there could have been a dead body floating in the creek for a whole 24 hours after another person saw it, but we'll never know for sure.
Wow, that's crazy. So I have some shots of the eulogy of people gathered and stuff, for this, for Tabby, and the celebration of life and stuff that they did for her. The picture to your guys' top left is of Drake, of her little boy at the time. And this is of Drake and Michael, the husband of Tabby, at her gravesite, which is just heartbreaking to see, for her little son to be there and to know that, he's not going to really know his mother. It's just heartbreaking. So there's a lot of stuff in the paper that kept going in the Tribune and stuff like that, a lot about things that were going on to try to create awareness and to try to get more information and stuff of the crime. And honestly, this crime reminds me a lot of Delphi, where you almost need a flow chart to keep track of everybody and how everybody knows each other, and stuff like that from it. But at this point, they're still trying to find information out. This was the first Christmas that the little boy was going to have by himself, and different fundraisers and rides that they were doing and stuff for Tabby's family, for burial and everything like that to help support. And then we get this big story that starts to pop about 3 who are being charged with the murder at the time. And at that point, it was Elizabeth Bowser, Kyle Neff, and Jonathan Yates. All young. They're all teenagers, if I'm correct. I think Elizabeth's 19, correct?
So at this point, Balser and Yates would have been 19, and I think Neff was 22.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so in the plot that thickens and stuff here, and you could tell me, so Tabitha, when she left her place that night, she was going with Amanda Pratt, who was her friend, and Amanda Pratt was dating Kyle Neff,
Correct.
and then they ended up getting married. And Amanda's the person who said her grandmother's sick, we need to go to the hospital. So then we have Tabitha Raines' husband is named Michael Raines. I'm just trying to let everybody know on names here when you start hearing them all over the place. And then you have Jonathan Yates, who you'll hear his name and stuff in here as well. And then also we've got and Andrew Bush, who will eventually be named in here, as far as all of these people now suddenly coming forward about these three in particular people. So I'm sure you can fill us in and how all of this came in, because I know we have one of them who turned informant, which I believe was Neff.
Yeah. So you're right. It's a sordid tale with many channels to go down, and it's hard to keep track of all the names, and it's hard for me, even being from there, and so to help to understand this, Tipton's a town of 5,000 people, kind of equidistant between Indianapolis and Kokomo, Indiana, and it's a town of 5,000 people with 4 stoplights. You know, everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows everybody's business. And as you'll see as the story unfolds, like there's so many like people with very few degrees of separation between each other in terms of relationships, and why that becomes a problem for the investigation. So Kyle Neff was the one who picked TABI up that night, and he made a call from their house, from TABI and Michael's house, at about 6:45, I think it was. They talked about in the trial. He calls and makes a cocaine deal with his friend in a small town just south of Tipton named Atlanta. It's only a couple hundred people.
Yeah.
So he says that the story goes that he goes and the story goes is that he did pick his story is that he did pick TABI up from her house, but he dropped her off at the Village Pantry downtown Tipton, which is just probably 2 or 3 minute drive from the house that she was living in. He says he dropped her off at the Village Pantry after picking her up and never saw her again. Was his first story. And you'll learn as time goes on that Kyle Neff and TABI were having an extramarital relationship at the time, and there's threesomes and foursomes and just really weird stuff for teenagers to be involved in. But apparently the story goes that Kyle, after he does the cocaine, he comes back to town. He sees TABI still at the Village Pantry. They talk for a minute, I guess, and then he goes and finds. After TABI asks him to go find Elizabeth Balser because she wanted to party with her, he says he goes and finds Balser and finds out that Balser wants to fight TABI because apparently TABI stole some cocaine. And so the story goes that Kyle drove back to Village Pantry, which would have been just a few blocks away, because I guess where he saw Elizabeth would have been near the courthouse, which is just a couple blocks away. He goes back to the Village Pantry. He tells TABI that he found Balser and they want to meet in the park in half an hour. So at this point, it'd probably be like 10 o'clock. And so that's his story so far.
Uh-huh.
There's no record of anybody giving TABI a ride to the park. She doesn't have her son with her. but there's no record of anyone taking her to the park. And then, so this is where Andrew Bush comes into play. There wasn't a whole lot reported to the public or the media regarding the case from the law enforcement agents that were investigating between the murder itself and then March of 03. So the entire winter goes by. And all of a sudden, these, the police announced that they've made these arrests. And the story goes that there was this kid named Andrew Bush who was living in Tipton at the time, but moved back to his mother's in Illinois right after the murder, started having nightmares about what he had seen in the park that night. And so he goes to a psychiatrist in Illinois, and the psychiatrist urges him to talk to the police. And this is before the mother even knew, I guess. So anyway, they call the state police here in Tipton, the state police detectives that are living in Tipton, as well as the Tipton City Police Department. And members of those parties went to Clinton, Illinois in March of 03 to interview this Andrew Bush, who told them basically the entire story that the prosecutor eventually bases his case on. And I can keep going, or if you want me to.
No, I'm listening. So to the stuff from Bush that I remember kind of reading was that it was being said by Neff and all of them that Bowser was the one who shot Tabitha, because when Tabby got to the park, then it was supposed to be that she confronted her like immediately, that she was saying, "You stole cocaine from me," started to hit her with the gun that she had. And then all of a sudden she was basically shot, if I'm correct, in the forehead, correct? The right close range, right at the forehead.
Yeah. So right about the time that Neff tells the police that he scheduled this meeting between Balser and Tabby, Andrew Bush is sitting in the park pavilion that you saw in the map earlier, and he sees Tabby walk across the footbridge in the park that's on the other side. That it was right by the pool when you had your mouse cursor.
Yeah.
And she walks across that platform, and he says that she seems worried, antsy, in a hurry, like something's on her mind. But she stops into the pavilion after he gets her attention, and they sit there and share some vodka. I guess 10 or 15 minutes rolls by, and then Balser's car rolls into the park from the front entrance. And Balser and Neff get out of the car. They walk down behind that old bathroom that I was telling you about, and then they smoke a joint, I guess. They walk around the creek bank around to the other side where that footbridge is that I was showing you.
Yeah.
And that's where John Yates comes in from under the bridge, because I guess Balser had asked him to watch her back during this fight. And it also came out later, and this didn't come out later, but it came out later that Kyle Neff, because I guess Balser promised him an 8-ball of cocaine. I don't even know how much that is or what that means, but an 8-ball of cocaine is what he said. So that he, if he would find a gun to supply Balser with for this fight, just to scare her, I guess was the idea. Mm-hmm. So Neff goes back to his mom's house, which is literally a block from the park, grabs the gun, and then comes and meets Balser in the high school parking lot across the street from the park. And then they drive over together. So you have, this is perfect. So you have this. So they pull up, and remember, back in the day, that parking lot wasn't there. There was
this isn't here, guys.
Yep. And you can see that big building there, kind of in the middle of the pathway, is the pavilion. So Bush is sitting in there. Tabby comes across the footbridge, which is right up here by the pool. It's hard to see from this map because the County Historical Society words are there, but there's a footbridge right there. And so they pull in, and back in the day, there were these really two huge old oak trees down in this depression that's now a parking lot. And they park her car, which is like a 79 Buick or something. It's a boat of a car. Anyway, they park between those two giant pines, and then they walk down around the creek bank and to this footbridge that I showed you in the beginning. Bush and Tabby are sitting in the pavilion, and they yell, and Balser yells to Tabitha in the pavilion, And then Bush and Tabitha both walk that distance straight across the park through there,
Right.
across the pathway to that little landing place right before. So it would be on the south side of the shore right there by the footbridge.
Okay.
So they get there. Yeah. And then what you say happens. Yes. So according to Bush, Balser accuses her of stealing cocaine. She denies it. Balser hits her in the face with a pistol. She falls to the ground. Bush tries to go to Tabby's aid. Neff and Yates hold him back. Balser pulls the gun out, aims it at Bush, and says, "Shut the F up, don't say an effing word." And she turns around, and Tabby's halfway gotten back on her feet at this point. But when she looks up, Balser points the gun at her forehead and shoots her in the head. And at this point, Bush says that he can tell that Yates and Neff are absolutely horrified, shocked that this would happen, which doesn't make much sense if you supply someone with a loaded gun. But that's the story. So they let go of Bush. He runs across that footbridge and then heads east towards his house, which would have been 2 miles. If you see east, you see where the South Pole Drive-In is right there.
Yeah.
He went straight across that footbridge and turned right on South Street and kept going out of the view of the map. But if you keep going a couple miles that way, and you have to cross tracks and whatever else, but there's a trailer park out there, and he says that he went that entire 2 miles all the way back to his house.
Well, I'm sure you're scared to death after you just watched somebody get murdered in front of you. That would probably.
Yeah, I'm sure the adrenaline helped.
And the gun that Bowser had, she got from Neff, correct? It was Neff's mother's gun,
Neff's mother's gun. And if you see, so you see where South Street and Main Street bisect right there?
Yes.
You keep going towards the pool. 1, 2. If you go, so you would go west of the pool. There's a street right there.
Yeah.
Go past the green marker. Go to the left of the green marker.
Okay.
So it would be that street. That's Condi Street. And it's just out of view. But if you go another block north, Kyle's mom's house sat right there. And he got the gun from there. They met over here at the parking lot of the high school where it's kind of tore up right there. There's actually a football field right there, but they put turf there now. But anyway, so you see the Tipton High School marker down here to the bottom, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a parking lot right there north of the building. Kyle parked his motorcycle there, and then they drove. So County Road 200 South, like, dead ends into the park right there. So they drove right there, and then that's how they went around. So that's kind of the lay of the land. I know it's a lot of moving parts.
Oh, no, that's why we definitely appreciate you and need you during all this, because there is so many things that are going on and so many names and stuff that keep popping up and from all of it. So, as we look and go through this, we see about the charges for these three people are coming forward. Then Neff takes a plea bargain because he's going to testify against it's Elizabeth Bowser. And so he takes a plea deal. And then this just kind of goes into some case info about the opening statements and what they said that she did. And then the husband and stuff, testifies and stuff as well. I know there was later on some like suspicion and stuff of her husband and stuff also, but he's there. He's testifying in this case. And then the forensic pathologist testified to talk about the bruising and everything on her face and injuries to her face from getting hit with the weapon and then basically being shot, on the forehead and stuff like that too. And they have all of these about different people testifying and everybody coming forward and all of this. So the defense attorney, some of the info and stuff here talks about this defense attorney who is working and the case and questions all these witnesses whether they're telling the truth, because the prosecutor at the time, the Tippecanoe prosecutor was Jay Rich, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And so he's the one who's doing this trial or whatever. And so they have this sentencing that's supposed to be coming up for NEFF, and all this is going on because he came forward or whatever. They sentenced NEFF to this maximum penalty that he's supposed to get, which is only 4 years, by the way, everybody. And then we go into unbelievableness. And you'll definitely have to help us all through this one. So Bowser ends up found not guilty, right?
Right. Let's get our timeline trace. So, Bush gives that statement to detectives in the deposition. That night, they come back to Indiana and arrest these three. They arrest Neff and Yates and Tipton, and they arrest Balser in Bloomington, Indiana, which is a couple hours south of Tipton. And that's where Indiana University is. But anyway, so that happens in March of 2003. And Neff turns state witness right after that. So, and the reason that you'll understand probably why more than anything is that the only piece of physical evidence in this entire case is the gun.
Right.
And the bullet. That's it. And so it's easy to see why Neff took the plea, because there's only really one physical piece of evidence to link anyone to the crime. And he's the only one really
who brought it.
That would get in front of a jury and not be able to refute any other evidence, because the other stuff is just hearsay and what you believe and don't believe. So Bush's statements get all three of them arrested. Neff takes the plea and tells the story, but lies about part of it, and then comes again to tell the rest of the story, that the gun was actually his mom's gun. And that's when he agreed to take a felony battery charge instead of the murder and aiding and inducing the criminal, or whatever the laws were here in Indiana at the time.
Right.
And so the very first story that the cops heard involved Yates and Balser. The very first person that came to the police said that. John Yates, 5 days after the murder, passed the polygraph test. Passed it. Not long after that, so Yates, we're talking about Yates, the guy who showed up just to be kind of a bodyguard.
Yeah.
And so that happens. And then, Yates passes the polygraph test. Andrew Bush, in addition to his deposition, he admitted to drinking probably half of a fifth of vodka that day. He had injected about 120 milligrams of OxyContin that day.
Jeez.
He had also taken between 3 and 4 milligrams of Xanax that day. And right about the time that these three were charged with murder, Andrew Bush also failed the polygraph test.
Wow.
And so Prosecutor Jay Rich, who was still the prosecutor in Tipton County, he just got reelected to his 5th term, I think, in November. He doesn't seem to care about any of that. He presses on with this theory. And, as we get into this, you'll understand why, if you were on this jury, you wouldn't convict Balser. There's just not enough, considering all the other mitigating circumstances, there's just not enough to get her on a murder charge. There's just not. And so
Neff, so just to make sure, recap here. So Neff is the one who who has Tabitha and says he is the one in a car with her, taking her to a 7-Eleven.
Correct.
Then he's saying to her, hey, Bowser wants to meet with you or whatever, to go party with you, because they're going to party together.
That's the ruse that they get her to the park with. And so Kyle says he dropped her off at we'll call it the 7-Eleven. It's just a convenience store in downtown Tipton that was called Village Pantry.
Yeah.
It's actually an eye doctor now, which is crazy, but So he says he drops her off 6:30-ish out in front of the convenience store. He goes and buys cocaine. He drives through the Tipton County countryside, ingesting the cocaine. He gets back to town, sees Tabby again at the convenience store, finds out that she wants to go party with Balser. Because in Balser, I guess, as the story goes on too, you'll find that Balser apparently had a crush on Tabby, because Balser is a lesbian, and that's kind of where another kind of weird thing about the sexual nature of this whole thing too kind of comes into play. So
Yeah.
Neff then finds Balser. This is the story that he tells. He finds her, just which is, if you understand the geography of Tipton, it's just around the corner where he finds Balser.
Right.
Gets the story. Tabby has supposedly stole this cocaine. He goes back to Village Pantry, tells Tabby, won't give Tabby a ride to the park. Then the story goes, he drove over to his mom's right by the park.
Get the gun.
Got the gun, went over to the high school parking lot, met Balser in her late model Buick, and then they drove to the park. And yet Yates met them later. I don't know. And Yates will tell you that he wasn't there. He's actually the only one of the three that let me interview him. He says he wasn't there. He passed the polygraph. So there's no, it's easy to make the case that Yates was possibly framed just because of the polygraph and, the hearsay, but he'll tell you that he wasn't there. He didn't have anything to do with it. And he's actually quoted in the book, but,
and Andrew Bush is just somebody who happens to be in the park that day.
Right. So Bush is a whole different crazy story. Like, he came from Illinois. He had some drug issues, obviously big drug issues. And they only got worse when he moved in with his dad in Tipton. And he had spent the whole day just doing drugs and drinking. And his buddy dropped him off in the park because his buddy was going to go meet some girl. And so he just happened to be there that night.
And sees Tabitha.
Sees Tabby walking across the footbridge, and then the rest is, the rest we just
He's lucky he lived, honestly. I mean, to be a witness of that, it could have something happened to him.
Yeah, and so there was also some speculation that Bush played a larger role than what we were told. But he the story goes, and there was also a mysterious death that he claimed to not have a part of, but a kid died of an overdose of fentanyl patches on him back then, right around the same time.
Yeah.
There was suspicion that Andrew Bush and his dad were involved in that. And then the theory that comes from the victim's family is that they paid him so many X amount of dollars to spill the beans on this other death, and that they would just go with his story here, which it's impossible to prove if that's the truth. But then you think of Andrew Bush failing the polygraph a year before the trial, yet the prosecutor is still trying to use that as his centerpiece, his foundation, his key witness. It just seems fishy. And then you come to understand that Kyle Neff's mom runs a very popular restaurant in town, and she's very good friends with the prosecutor.
Well, that was going to be kind of my next questions, because usually when stuff like this goes down, there's a lot of people in small towns who all know each other.
Tangled web.
As you has expressed. And so then you kind of wonder about that, because, I mean, obviously, when we look at back here in 2000, it's harder to say which they could do now, which is, if somebody shot somebody, you would have some forensics that may show that they had gunpowder and stuff on them,
Yeah. And so with the lack of physical evidence mixed with the tunnel vision that the prosecutor clearly had in this case, in my opinion, that's what paved the way for the breeding ground of conspiracy theories that came about it. And then to make this kind of, to piggyback off the point you just made, you have that picture there of them looking in the park.
Right.
October 2nd through 5th, 2002 in Indiana. It was unseasonably warm. It wasn't windy. There was no precipitation those 3 days. And it's hard to believe, if you believe the story, that they shot her right there by the shuffleboard courts, right there by the footbridge, drug her body all the way across the park, which is about 11 football fields, because I did the math, that there's no blood. There's nothing. And of course they wouldn't have had, the gunpowder, the stippling, or any of that stuff from the people that were allegedly involved, because they didn't get the information from Drew Bush until about 5 months after it all happened.
Right.
It's hard to believe. But the cops, when they found the body, they did what you're seeing here. They scoured it with a metal detector, and with the fine tooth comb, and they just did not find any forensic evidence to link anyone to the crime. And they didn't find any of Tabitha's blood either. So
wow.
That's where you have, for me, once I finally got the information that I was denied originally, When you read all the case files, you start connecting the dots on your own, and then you think to yourself, it was poorly investigated, should have never gone to trial with the evidence and theory that they had. Plus, you have the fact that there was absolutely zero forensic evidence found in the park other than the bullet in her head. It's not hard to see why the family got angry. It's not hard to see why a ton of conspiracy theories were spawned out of this when you understand the inner workings of the relationships of the people that were involved, both in the murder and in the investigation. And, obviously this is so cliche to say, but buy the book. You won't put it down. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
So we've got the forensic person testifies, but the forensic expert is only talking about the injuries to Tabby's body. There's, like you said, there isn't anything else for him to testify.
Can I make another quick point about that?
Sure, please.
Before I forget. So, like, you have the forensic pathologist there that day saying, this is what we found based on the time she was in the water. This is when we think she died. The one thing that was poignant about his testimony to me is that along with the bullet hole in her head, there was extensive edema and trauma to the face that would have been delivered with what he said was a fist in addition to being pistol whipped.
Right.
But the story that Bush tells, the story which makes him turn into the key witness, doesn't involve her getting punched or kicked or beaten at all, other than the pistol whip in the beginning, which would account for the black eye that she has in her autopsy. And so what's important about that is that the forensic pathologist said that he couldn't tell whether it was from a fist or the butt of the gun, but he could say with absolute certainty that those were wounds that were delivered to her before she died, Right. And so nowhere in Bush's accounts, and he's interviewed about it 3 or 4 times, nowhere in those accounts does he say that there was a struggle, there was a fight, no one got punched. And I think that, to me, that adds to the like, whoa, like
more people could have been beating her up.
Right.
Yeah, because it says, it had in here that she had bruising on her right eye, her cheek, her lip, and her chin.
Yep.
And below her ear.
And on her jawline.
Yeah. And they said from blunt force trauma, which they left probably a fist is literally what he commented, was probably a fist.
Yeah.
So they say it, but he recognizes the gun, but he talks about the fist as well.
Yeah. He said probably a fist. So we can assume that it was a fist, right?
And about on her shoulder.
Yeah. And so there was also
a choking hold too.
There was somebody had, there was evidence of a manual strangulation. There weren't any petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes or ligature marks around the neck or anything like that. But there was evidence that she was choked with hands.
Yeah.
What else was it? And so the story goes, the one that Bush tells is that he heard 2 gunshots. The one that Neff told says that she emptied the clip. What's important about that little piece is, as it pertains to the forensic pathologist testimony in this case, is that he's, hang on a second. I completely lost my train of thought, Justice. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. That's okay.
Where was I going with that? Help me.
Well, you were talking about the strangulation. There was nothing from, with the eyes and stuff like that, which, by the way, it makes me think that somebody could have been holding her while somebody was hitting her.
Yeah, okay, there we go. So Neff said Balser emptied the clip, right? So, and then they have the one bullet hole for sure. Bush says he heard at least 2 gunshots, and then the pathologist says that there's this wound that enters through the upper shoulder and then out of the neck. But due to the fact that she was in the water for 3 days, they could not say within a medical certainty that it was a gunshot. And but the pathologist said in at least the transcripts that I read, that he said it was his opinion that it was a bullet hole that entered the back and went through the neck. So, but they never, and it would have had an exit wound. And then you think to yourself, well, they found the bullet in her head, but they didn't find any bullets in the park. And if you have an exit wound, you have a bullet laying there somewhere.
Right.
So, they couldn't prove it because of how long she'd been in the water. But I think it just adds to, if you're paying attention to what's being said and then what's in between the lines as a juror, how can you believe the story that's coming out when none of this stuff really matches up to what
It's not adding up.
What the forensics say? And then that's where all the conspiracy theories, and Buffy, the mother in the book, she does unravel a couple of pretty crazy conspiracy theories that seem nuts. But I can promise you that I'm from Tipton, Indiana, and I know these people, and it's not that far out. Like she's not smoking anything. Like that's like it's
yeah.
And then you have to understand the frustration of the mother with how, you, from what you've been able to gather, Justice, I'm assuming that you think that this was poorly investigated. I know that you've probably looked at a lot of crimes. And so it's easy to see why the parents were angry. And I won't say how and go into detail, but I'm very closely connected to a lot of the people in this.
Yeah.
And I know.
Well, I want to point that out to everybody that the book that you have done for what stuff that I know about it, that you have worked with Tabby's mom and talked to Tabby's mom and shared information in your book about discussions and stuff with her. Of course, she's going to be extremely frustrated because I saw her statements about the prosecutor when this was all going on, that she did think it was just a poor job for, that Bowser didn't, got away with doing this, which I would say that would you agree with the statement that most of the different people who were making comments and saying what happened that day, wouldn't you see in general that all of them are at least admitting that Bowser was the shooter?
I think that that's the common thread of what people were saying in the story.
And so, and if she's the shooter, then you would think that trial you would make sure is solid. And you're right. It doesn't, other than a gun, that Bowser didn't get the gun. It wasn't her gun. She didn't bring the gun. Neff brings the gun. He's trying to make the deal because he knows he brought the gun, and that there's a connection period right there. That's why he flips on her. Mm-hmm. And then there's, it's then, this guy says this guy says that. It's just, it makes no sense. Now that does make me ask and wonder, why did he go ahead and rush to trial after getting this statement and not making sure they had more information together? Is it political stuff that's in there? Is it family connection stuff that's going in there? Because we find that a lot here in Indiana.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go into specifics of how I'm closely connected to the Neff family, but I am. And I know for a fact that the owner of the restaurant, Kyle Neff's mother, had some of her, and there was a giant shed behind the restaurant, and then Kyle lived in the greenhouse behind the shed. And that none of that stuff exists anymore because they've all torn it out for an interstate interchange out west of Tipton. But the story goes, and I believe it because I know this person as well as another person can know another person. Let's just say that. And this person told me that she knows for a fact that Debbie Neff, the owner of Cheryl's restaurant, had some of her employees throw away giant plastic tote bins without looking at any of them in the summer of 2003. So
wow.
Go ahead and do the math there. And then, Kyle Neff himself had been in trouble a lot before, and his mother, for whatever reason, would always try to help him wiggle as far off the hook as possible. And I think in this situation, the way it unfolded, Neff's only choice was to take a plea. But I think that when you read the book and understand the relationship that Jay Rich had with some of the people in town, the relationships that the state investigator, Tony Frawley, who lived in Tipton, is from Tipton, went to school with Jay Rich, some of the connections there, you're going to be left, and I was left this is how I tell people. My book doesn't solve the case, but it makes you leave thinking, what the F? Because why did not somebody at a very minimum from the outside of Tipton County look in on that real quick and understand that there were just far too many conflicts of interests for the people that were tasked with investigating and prosecuting the case to the people that were involved in the case, and that there should have been, there should have been some type of outside investigation from state level. And it's unfortunate, but that's how it happened. And and whether what was all said is true or not, and in the trial, and the story that we were told was the actual truth of what happened, there's just not enough evidence to convict someone of murder on that alone. It's unfortunate. So you have to be disappointed in the public justice system at the county level there for even taking it to trial. And then you have to question the motives of why. And then you start to understand the relationships of how closely people are connected in that town. And it just at a very minimum, it just has a bad look to it. And then you have the fact that Jay Rich denied my public records request in 2014 or 15 it was. And thankfully I had an anonymous source give me the material, but it just seems like it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, that something isn't right. Something was hidden. Something was done because there was more culpability somewhere else that other people didn't want to know about. And how closely were they connected to the people who run the town of Tipton? It's really scary as a taxpayer to see all that unfold. And I would say this too. I want to say this before I forget. Balser, there's not any physical evidence to connect her to anything, just like there's not Yates. And I would almost, if this one thing hadn't been true, Elizabeth Balser, since she's been acquitted, has been bragging to everyone under the sun that she got away with murder. And she even bragged to her sister about it, her own sister, who then went to the police about it. So,
well, can I add that just reminded me of something that we haven't kind of brought up to everybody yet. So after all these people are saying that Balser's there, Balser was the one who had the issue trying to accuse TABI of that she stole cocaine, that this is going on. He shows up, he gets a gun, he gives it to Balser. Balser does this, right? Well, yeah. Balser, though, tries to suddenly come up with a alibi stating that she is at Little Daddy's strip club in Kokomo.
Correct.
And that her mother knows that she's at Little Daddy's strip club in Kokomo with her at the time of the murder. Because
the story goes that the mom walked in and applied for a job that night and got a job. And so they stayed. And the story goes that Elizabeth was getting really friendly with the dancers, and the mom was there doing her dance routine. And she couldn't have possibly been in Tipton the night of the murder because of that. But you find out in the trial later that the night that they all claimed to have been there, where the mom got the job and the daughter hung out, was that the check that the mother wrote for her dancing outfit when she got the job, that whatever night that was dated for the night afterward. And there was the court, when the trial went on, the court stopped for a while, and the reporter reporting on it at the time from the newspaper said that it got really heated between Robert Alden, who was Elizabeth's attorney, and Prosecutor Rich over whether they were going to let that into evidence. Because, if that check was written on the date that they claim that all this happened, it's the wrong date. And, Alden's case is really kind of blown, right? His theory on how she couldn't have been there was blown. But what helped the defense in this case is that there were video surveillance cameras from an ATM machine in Kokomo that showed Elizabeth at the bank that night.
Yeah.
Now, it was well before the murder, but it helps the plausibility to a juror that she was in Kokomo. There's video evidence of her in Kokomo. The story goes such and such. And then there were a couple of employees at the nightclub that actually contacted police and testified in the trial too that Elizabeth was acting weird, and she actually hooked up with one of them and spent a few days with her. and all that stuff. So it's just
So and Balser, and if I'm trying to remember who it was, but Balser also had a phone call that was from Little Daddy's strip club, wasn't it? That she called somebody and told somebody on the phone that somebody, a friend of hers body was found and that she did it.
Yeah. So the night that the body was found, she called the strip club. And so the story goes that Elizabeth had been spending every night at the strip club between the 2nd and the 5th or whatever it was. But the night of the 5th, she called and wanted to talk to whoever the girlfriend was that she was hooking up with, thinking that she would talk to her and that the phone would get patched over to Elizabeth's mother. But I guess the girl, I think her name was Desiree Green in the book. Yeah. The girl didn't want to talk to Elizabeth because she had been acting weird since they had spent those few days together and hooked up. And apparently the story goes that Elizabeth Balser held her under a shower head until it was like scalding hot and burned her or something.
Wow.
But that's just, she testified to that in trial. So I think it's okay to say it publicly. But Balser calls the strip club, wants to talk to Desiree. Desiree doesn't want to talk. Elizabeth says, let me talk to my mom. And I guess before the other employee who also testified could get the phone to Elizabeth's mother, Elizabeth apparently says, they found my friend dead in the creek and I did it.
Yeah.
And in the trial, Alden says, well, you could have just misunderstood her. And she could have said, they found my friend dead in the creek and they think I did it. And that seemed to be smoothed over with the jury pretty well because, I mean, she got acquitted. So
we've got that. So, by the way, Balser's trial was held in Hamilton County Court in Noblesville.
Yeah, I got to change the venue. The trial did, yeah.
You know, as we hear from a lot of the small town trials that end up happening and stuff here. But so when Bowser is found not guilty because they don't have any forensic evidence basically for Bowser, then suddenly the prosecutor comes out. So the Tippecanoe County prosecutor, Jay Rich, comes out and decides, I am dropping the charges for Yates and Neff.
Yeah.
And they both get out, correct? Am I thinking that correctly?
That's correct. So Yates had the charges dropped with prejudice, meaning that they could, or whatever, which one it was, with or without prejudice, where they can revisit the case and charge him again.
Yeah.
And so what's funny is Jonathan Yates's lawyer, Patrick Roberts, after I had left the journalism field, I worked for the city of Peru, Indiana, which is just north of Kokomo. Pat Roberts was our city attorney, and really good attorney, really good. He's been on the bench for 50 years. Anyway, so and I have to go back and read all this stuff. And when I worked with Pat, I didn't even know he was the lawyer. So it's a small world. But anyway, Pat, after Yates's charges are dropped, he has a press conference. Pat Roberts does, and he tells the public. And I don't know if this is a normal practice for a lawyer, but he tells the public, I am going to let Tabitha's family, the mother, look at every case file that I have. So that, because at this time, Buffy's going crazy, right?
Yeah.
Because she just watched an acquittal. She just saw the only piece of physical evidence linked criminal to it, a plea deal where he's going to be out of jail in a couple of years if he's in good behavior. And then these charges are dropped. So, and this is a huge story in Indiana at the time. You have all the Indianapolis media up here, and Buffy is just holding court, which she should. And so, there was a lot of accusations publicly at that time that law enforcement, the prosecutor's office were shady. There's something going on here. This is crazy. And so, what Pat Roberts does, he holds a press conference, and he says, "I'm going to let the mother of the victim come to my office and view every single case file I have because I want to be transparent so that no one thinks that there was any type of cover up or craziness going on from my end."
Huh.
And
that's interesting the way that was worded.
And so that happened. And you can go back and read newspapers.com archives. Pat Roberts says that after the charges were dropped. And I never knew that Pat was the lawyer until after I had left a work relationship with him, and I haven't talked to him, so I don't even know if he knows the book is out. But and I don't know for sure what I have in terms of if it's the whole thing of the case file, but I know I probably have what was given to a lawyer at discovery.
Right.
I think it's probably safe to say, but and listen, I'm telling this right now, like I don't know any of this. I honestly don't. I would have to go to jail because I honestly don't know. But if you connect the dots of what Pat Roberts says, it seems pretty obvious that I don't know how it changed hands before it got to me, but the anonymous source that gave me these probably somewhere down the line got them from the law office of Pat Roberts. That's the only thing I can think of.
Right. Right.
It really is. But I'm glad I thank God that I got it. And it's such a crazy story of how I got the information too.
So basically, everybody, then we have where, Josh is filing for Freedom of Information Act to get this info. All this stuff is, dropped. It's been all this many years. They don't release anything to him, but that's from the courts. But he does have a source that contacts him and shares this information with him. And so he gets to look at what was given out and stuff in trial. As he shared, he's not sure, if everything is, absolutely there. I guess there could be something maybe not there, but, and that, he's talked and worked with Tabi's mom, talking to her about the case and stuff like that. And I mean, how is she doing? How is Buffy still handling all of this? And I know she at least has the joy of her grandson, but
so yeah, how much time do we have? I don't know.
As much as you want.
All right, so there's a lot to unpack with what the questions that you just asked, but there's a lot to say too. So I was always intrigued by the story. I graduated from Tipton the year that the murder happened in the park. And then, as I went to college, got a degree, went to be a journalist, the case intrigued me not only because it happened in my hometown right about the time I was becoming a young adult, but also because of the close connections that I have to some of the people. And I got a job at the KOKOMO Tribune, and I was there for 6 of the 13 years that I was an active newspaper writer. And I did sports for most of the time, but I switched to news right before I kind of got out of it altogether. And I was thinking of things I could write about. And I knew that Drake, the son, was going to be a teenager soon. And I was like, why don't I just look into this and see what I can do? And then I got Michael to let me interview him. I got Buffy to let me interview her. Jay Rich gave me the statement and then denied my records requests. And then I just kind of wrote a recap of the story with interviews of like, where are they now? What are they doing now? And then Buffy let me come to her house, and I talked to her for a couple hours that day, and then she went on the record with me. But we stayed in touch, and the more I learned, and this is 2016. So the more I learned, the more I thought there's way more to this, and I could make something more than just a newspaper article, a couple thousand words out of this. And I stayed in touch with Buffy. And then one day I was at the Tribune office. I got a call from a person that I didn't recognize the number from on my desk phone in the office. And they said, hey, I've got some information about the Tabby Raines case, but I want to stay anonymous. So here's what we need to do. I'm going to give you this address, and you need to drive over there, and there'll be something for you waiting on the porch in Kokomo. And I was like, back then I was like, that was kind of like journalist crack, it was like drugs for a journalist. Like that's what you
sure.
those moments, right? And so like I drove my Jeep over there, I parked out front. It was in this little neighborhood. Didn't feel unsafe or anything, but like I got out. Yep, there was a box on the porch, and in that box was a stack of 7 or 8 CDs, like burnt CDs.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right. So I got back in my Jeep. I went back to the newspaper and popped them in my old laptop that still had a CD drive in it. And lo and behold, it was everything about the case, from the autopsy to every single supplemental report that I could ever want to do to write a book. And then the mom sat down with me again around Christmas of 2016. We had a really long interview about more of what was her life like the days leading up to the death, her daughter's death, and then like the years afterward. And she really let me like get inside, the feelings, the soul, the hurt. And as an empathic person, it was a hurtful thing for me to have to go through with her. But
sure.
And then at that moment, I was like, and I wasn't a really religious person, but I thought there's no way that all of this would be happening if it wasn't meant for me to like use my abilities to do this for this family. And that's really where the motivation stemmed from. In 2018, I got really sick. I found out that I had Crohn's disease.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's part of the story. So like the book got delayed for a long time because I was very sick, like near death sick back in 2018. I'm a lot better now. It's in remission. And then I got into like, as a journalist, you probably know this, but like you'll have these moments where you're like, I got to get in front of the keyboard.
Yeah.
And I read the motion of Lamine in the trial, sitting here one night, and I was like, there's my connector. And I pounded out like the rest of the book earlier this year. And it's been available since July 9th. And I've sold a couple hundred copies so far. But
well, we definitely want to share about that book, and I'm sure that Buffy appreciates her daughter's name getting back out there again about the case.
On July 9th in Tipton, I had a meet and greet about the book in downtown Tipton. And she was there, and she sat with me, and they're very appreciative. The mother had a lot of relationships go bad after this happened in Tipton because of the way she felt she was treated. And she ended up moving to Missouri. But anyway, she's very thankful for the work that I did. I feel blessed to be able to do it and help the family. But to tell you, Buffy still has a lot of anger and hurt over what's happened. I mean, no one's ever spent a day in prison for her daughter's murder.
Sure.
So while she's thankful that this has happened, she's now worried about the backlash, because I'll be honest, the book, if you read it, makes a couple of people in particular look really bad. And this is why I published the book under an LLC, because I didn't think it would be so far-fetched for someone to sue us over this.
Sure.
And so the mother is really worried right now that it's starting to grow legs and sell a little bit, and the story's getting out there.
Yeah.
I do worry about it, but at the same time, like, I'm not going to stop selling the books until I get hit with a cease and desist. And even if I do, and let's say I got a judge that's sympathetic to public officials, and I got sued, and they can have my LLC, which I promise you at this point is not worth a ton of money. So that's what I feel about it, But and the problem is that the mother has some pretty wild accusations that I quote her on, and she knew she was on the record about. It's a controversial book, I'm not going to lie. But, I, as my first foray into being an actual author, not just a reporter, I wanted to do it well, and I wanted to do it right. And I got that from my dad. And I told a newspaper reporter that the other day. I was like, when you make a promise to someone, you get it done. And it took me 7 years to do this, but I learned that from my dad. And he was the one that kind of kicked me in the rear to get this finished too this summer. And they're all from Tipton. They still live there. So it's been really cool.
Do you think, or does Buffy think at all that anybody is going to try to bring people to justice still, or no?
So the problem is that when Jay Ridge, the prosecutor, who's still the prosecutor, denied my public records request, he said that as it's an open case, it would jeopardize any new developments that would come out of the case. But, there hasn't been a new lead investigated by that office in 18 years. To answer your question, justice for Buffy will not come until Jay Rich is no longer a prosecutor, or someone from the state level gets attention from, from what's happening with this and starts to look into it on their own. And that's where Buffy feels so jaded, and that's why she moved out of Tipton. It's been a horrible thing, and I didn't. And part of the good part about this book being delayed is that it made me kind of like live her life for a little bit, having to read about it, and then now that my kids are a little older, I put myself in her shoes and I thought, what would you do if this was one of your kids? And I think that a lot of us as parents would probably lose their will to live for a while.
Yeah.
And the fact that the mother, persevered through this, and not only that, but just the way she was treated and the injustice. I have a lot of respect and admiration for Buffy. She's really been through the ringer, and she holds herself with grace. So, and she and her ex-husband Mark, who was Tabby's stepfather at the time of the murder, they've been as supportive and transparent as a journalist could ever dream for, to do a good job and make out a good product. So I want to thank them too.
So all the players, are they all still alive and all out of jail?
That's a good question. So Jonathan Yates, who was the only person of the three that actually gave me any time of day, he lives in Tipton still. He has no criminal record. He's never been in trouble. He passed the polygraph. Remember that back in 2003. But he still lives there, and he runs his own business, I believe. And I have a close relative who's on the city council in Tipton, and John has a really good relationship, or a good reputation as being a really good person who would help you out in any situation. So, I, at the very maximum through all of this, and I know John pretty well, at the very maximum, whether you believe he wasn't there at all or he was, and the story that was told was true, John made a bad decision by being at the park, but John had no way of knowing that was what he was walking into. So at the very minimum, John Yates was in the wrong place at the wrong time, trying to help a friend. And, I don't know that John deserved to go to prison for what his role was in that at all. For the longest time, Buffy didn't believe Balser was the shooter, because I guess they went and had dinner together and talked. And Elizabeth said, I had no part in this. She told her that over this dinner, all the while she's bragging to everyone under the sun that she did do it. And so for the longest time, Buffy didn't believe that Liz was the shooter until I let her read a script of my book before it got edited and published. And that kind of changed her mind. She says now she thinks that maybe Balser played a bigger role than she did. So, yeah. Wow. And so Balser, I tried to look all these people up in 2015 when I wrote the newspaper story. Yeah. And Neff wouldn't go on the record with me, but we did talk for a very long time because Kyle and I have known each other most of our lives. And so he was transparent, and that's when, and I'll say this too, Kyle told me that the Tipton County Sheriff at the time was going around and telling people not to talk to me if he knew that I was trying to interview them for the story. Yeah. So, and you'll learn more about Tony Frawley in the book. So I already knew that in the back of my mind back then. Kyle wouldn't go on the record. I was trying to look up Elizabeth Balser, and our crime reporter who sat next to me was like, hey, you're in luck. She's incarcerated in the Howard County Jail when we were working at the Tribune. Yeah. And one of our page designers at the Tribune, his wife was the jail commander in the county. And I was like, Mike, do you think if I called Robin and tried to schedule an interview with an inmate, she'd be cool with that? He's like, hell yeah, happens all the time. So I call Mike's wife, and I was like, hey, this is the situation. She knew who I was. This is the situation, and here's what I'm asking you. Are you comfortable with it? And she was like, yeah, let me go talk to her. She's right here. And so Mike's wife goes and talks to Elizabeth, and she said, Robin comes back on the phone, and she says she'll talk to you. When do you want to do it? I was like, tomorrow, 9 a.m., And so I get over to the jail, and I get to the front desk. I tell them who I am. They knew I was coming. They give me my super special badge. which doesn't make any sense to you if you think about being in jail. Why would you want a badge to everyone to know that you're not there for jail reasons? But, so we walk across the lobby. Robin lets me in that holding cell, that kind of holding cell thing. And I've never been to jail, but there's a holding cell there before you actually get into the jail part. It's kind of like they lock one thing and then they open the other one to let you go in.
Yeah.
In that holding cell, and Robin's like, wait here, I got to go get her and make sure you're not going to get shanked and all that. And I don't even know where we were going to sit. It didn't get that far. Robin comes back 30 seconds later and says, she's changed her mind. She doesn't want to talk to you.
Wow.
And so that really made me mad. I'll admit.
Yeah.
It was almost like a big middle finger to me, in my opinion, and kind of drove me for a while to kind of dig up anything I could. Balser's still alive. I think she's out of jail. She's got a really long criminal history of driving while intoxicated, possession, driving on a suspended license, intoxicated with a passenger under 18. No murders or rapes or drug trafficking or anything like that. But and then Neff, so Yates, no criminal record, seems to be like a good guy. And then Neff, he after he got out of jail for this, he seemed to clean up his act quite a bit for several years. He got a CDL and drove semis for a while. And then he quit that to come back and help his mom run the business, because so in Tipton, it's at the intersection of State Road 28 and US 31. And the Cheryl's restaurant was right there on that intersection. And it's a pretty prominent intersection between Indianapolis and South Bend, because once you get north of Carmel, there's not a whole lot there. And so Cheryl's restaurant was the name, and it was very popular. But they Chrysler, which is now Stellantis, I think. But anyway, they put a gigantic factory right across the road from the restaurant, and their business just went through the roof. And so Kyle quit that and helped run the family business for a while. But unfortunately, in 2016, he was accused of child molestation on a family member, and he somehow got pled down on that to sexual misconduct with a minor. So he did a stint in prison for that. He's still struggling with drug addiction pretty bad. He's been to jail a couple of times for that. So his fortunes have not fared much better. And this is something that pains me to say, and I didn't even, because it happened after the book was published, but Drake, the son, he's 21 years old now, and he was just arrested for domestic battery in the presence of a minor or something. So he's struggled too. And I wanted to say this too. Like, I feel so bad for Drake, because Drake really didn't have much of a chance, to be honest, because his mom died, and then his dad, Michael's got some, and I know Michael because I've known him my whole life. He's got some mental health issues. And, he obviously dealt with the loss of the mother of his child when he was 19 years old still.
Right.
And so Michael went to the military and gave custody of Drake, which he said at the time was meant to be temporary custody of Drake, over to his mother, Roberta, the same woman that Tabby gave Drake to the night that she left.
Right.
And so with Drake ended up being raised by Roberta, and they moved to another small town near Tipton called Sheridan, Indiana, which is in the same county that Noblesville's in, that we talked about earlier.
Right.
I don't know much about Drake's childhood at all, but I just saw that literally like a couple of days before the book signing event, he was arrested on those charges. And I've talked to Buffy and Mark about it, and he's trying to get his act together. I think he's spent some time at a treatment center. I won't say any more about that, but it's just, I hope that everyone can pray for Drake, because some people, when they're born into unfortunate situations, they become products of their environment.
Absolutely.
And with therapy and the right people around you, you can heal from that and make something of your life. And I hope that happens for Drake. I feel, and I felt really bad about this book coming out at the same time, because he's trying to grow as a human being, and he's going to have to deal with this. So
Right.
It's
Right.
an awful time. And if I had known all this was going to happen, I would have just waited, but I didn't. So.
Well, I'm sure, in addition to how Buffy and stuff feels about it, that I mean, he would want answers and stuff like that too. And right now, like you said, it may not be sitting here saying, "Hey, here's exactly the person and this going on," but it's causing attention to the case, and that the case hasn't had answers. And that's a lot that we do here, is about these cold cases that have not had answers, and people need to be putting their eyes on it and seeing, what can we do to, cause attention to it and try to get more answers and stuff about the case. So, we appreciate you coming, because I think it's a great perspective from somebody who lives there and knows the area, has grown up there, knows the people. And so, that's a great perspective and stuff to kind of be able to share with everybody. And I'm sure that even though he's having a hard time, the attention that's going back to her case, that I would have hoped they would even just turn it over to somebody else to do, instead of keeping it with the same prosecutor.
Yeah. And I want to thank you guys, Justice, and all of the people that make this happen and the people that support you. People, there's some people that will say that this true crime thing that's become an interesting topic to so many people in this country. Some people find it weird. I don't at all. I think it's a great thing, because for every Tabitha, there's 1,000 Tabithas in this country, in terms of mysterious deaths, things that look weird on the surface, but you'll never know for sure, because there's people in power that won't let you see it. And so, like, what I'm getting at is, the more that we as a society can put a spotlight on those cases, like the Tabitha cases, like the Delphi girls, I think that this is a great tool to help push investigations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And shine a light on injustices. So thank you, Justice, and everybody, for not only having an interest, but making this thing happen. I think that this is a wonderful thing. And I really do appreciate the time of you letting me come on here and talk about the case. I could talk for another 2 hours, but my wife wants me to join
well, because of where you lived and grew up, I may reach out to you again, Josh, to talk to you about a couple other things. But
so that's one other thing. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. This isn't the only weird thing that ever happened in Tipton, and I'll just leave it at that. But
yeah. We cover a lot of my focus is a lot of Indiana cases, because I had a case, a true crime unsolved case of a 16-year-old girl who was murdered, where I grew up, and that me and my mother drove by when they found her body, and they still have not solved that case. That was back in 1981, because I'm way older than you, Josh, but we won't point that out. So, the Indiana,
thanks.
Yeah, the Indiana cases are really important to me, especially, when we talk about cold cases and the missing and CSAM and stuff against children. That's where my passion and stuff is. But so I want to tell everybody how they can find your book. We have it up here. What Happened to TABI? And can you let people know how they can get it and all those types of details?
Yeah, I just put it in the chat. So I want to explain this, because I got a really nasty grant from somebody the other day. So the United States Postal Service has increased its shipping rates in recent weeks, and so the price of the book went up a little bit, but it's just because of that, and I apologize. And they were like, "Well, you can't be charging different people different prices." And at first I was like, "You don't understand business at all." But anyway, so yeah, it's $25. And Justice, thank you so much. Yes, this is my Venmo handle. Josh-Sigler-5. And if you have a QR on your phone, that's the code right there. I have many other means of taking payment. I won't go into all those, because that's not what this is about. But if you want to send me an email to whathappenedtotabby@gmail.com, and it's right here in the chat. if you want to copy and paste it, because I know it's kind of a long name. Shout out to my wife who made that. Also, she's been doing my accounting, so shout out my wife, Laura Sigler. She's amazing. And so that's how you can get the book. And I have sold out of the first 2 runs. I have more on the way. And so what'll happen
awesome.
is once we get that payment, and you can go ahead and send me an email to that address, I'll just get your address and I will ship you the book from home, because I independently published it for now until I get tired of doing my own accounting. And then I'll probably maybe go through a publisher and see if we can get it on some bookshelves. But the ultimate goal is to get Buffy some justice and get Drake some peace. And, and also proceeds from this book are going to a couple of TABI memorials. We are raising funds to get a memorial park bench of her in Tipton Park with her name inscribed on it and all of that. And also, depending on how well my sales go, I'm going to set up a Tabby Raines Memorial Scholarship down in the Tipton area. And I don't live in Tipton anymore. I now live in the South Bend, Indiana area. And but I'm back there a lot. And September 7th, 8th, and 9th coming up here is the Tipton County Pork Festival in downtown Tipton. And I will be in an office near downtown selling my books those days as well. So
I wish you all the luck in the book, and for calling attention to the case. I have his email going across the bottom of the screen, guys. What happened to tabby@gmail.com. Thank you to Mr. Josh or Mrs. Sigler, however I want to call it. And I will also have all of this info posted up in a community post. I'll drop in his app that you can scan and order a book and email him and make all the arrangements and stuff like that. Because
don't be afraid if you don't have Venmo. Just shoot me an email, and I mean, if it takes a check in the mail, and we'll do it that way even. So I just, digital payments are way easier for everybody these days, but not everybody does it. So I'm not just a Venmo merchant. You can mail me a check if that's what it boils down to, if you want the book. So just shoot me an email. We'll work it out. And thank you so much for everything and everyone for having me on today. And Justice, thank you so much. This is an honor. This is actually the very first podcast I've ever done for the book. But I had my own podcast in the past. I also did some broadcasting as well. So I love this kind of stuff. This is amazing.
Great.
This is amazing stuff. So thank you.
We are honored that you're here. We appreciate you filling us in more on the case and stuff like that too. We will definitely keep it on our radar. And if there's anything at all that you find out that there is something that our justice warriors can do to help with Tabby's case, or anything that we can help out her mom Gabby and all of that stuff, we would love to do that. So let us know about that, and I'm sure you and I will keep in touch and stuff as well.
There's another podcast, and the only reason I'm saying this is because it's run by the case advocate for Tabby, True Crime with Marv. Marv is the lady that is the case advocate for that family.
Yes.
And she's done quite a bit of work. So Marv is who the person is, and that's not an endorsement of her podcast. I've never listened to it, but that's the same person. And she does a lot of work, kind of like what I've done for the last 7 years for that family. So I want to check her out. She has a lot more updates more instantly. I'm more of like a investigative, collect, and then write later type of journalist. But if there's any breaking news, Marv's done a great job on the breaking news on the Delphi case lately. Like, she's always got that stuff on her page immediately.
Yeah.
And so she is a treasure trove of information about Tabby too, if you wanted to dig deeper into the case. So
yeah. Well, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Josh, for being here. We all appreciate you, and we will let everybody know how to be able to get a hold of your book and you via email.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of your evening, and pray for justice for Tabby.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice.
Well, thank you guys for being here. I saw about Josh's book and his information coming out, that they did an article out on the KOKOMO Tribune and talking about him, and that how he was a actual resident and stuff there, and a reporter, and just thought that that was great information to bring him on and to share about, another story that needs attention, that needs justice. And I'm quite interested to learn a little bit more of what, what Tabby's mom believes is going on. And, is this another case where people have to leave office in order for justice to happen for people? It's just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. So definitely justice for Tabby, and our prayers and stuff for Drake, and to do well. And like I said, I will drop off all of Josh's information in a community post. And I very much appreciate all of you guys always being here and always making sure that justice is served daily. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great evening.